no one thought we were actually going to war. Although the preparation had been done and all the intention was there, we all felt that the Argentines would back down long before we even got there, the threat of war being enough. We were wrong, of course. Yeah, the Argies weren't going to back down that easy. Maggie was certainly going to have a fight on her hands. So, we spent the next few weeks on board the Norland, heading south. Now, despite the length of the journey, we still didn't have much time to ourselves. What with all the training they had us doing, medical, weapons, fitness, aircraft recognition, and so on. At one point, we heard news that we'd hit one of their ships, the Belgrano. Well, this was excellent news. I mean, we all cheered. In fact, up until we heard that an Exocet had hit one of ours, it was still the atmosphere you got on an exercise. But the news about the HMS Sheffield was a shock. We suddenly realised that the Argies could hit back. So we dropped anchor in Falklands Sound and began to move from the hold of the ship into the landing craft. Now, this is something that we'd been drilled in extensively over the previous couple of weeks. Having said that, one guy still managed to fall between the two craft and break his pelvis. Well, we all gave him a bit of a ribbing, you know. But then we were crammed in this landing craft. See, despite the cold, we were still in good humour. We headed for the shore. Now, we were told that we'd see a flashing light given by the SAS or the SBS if the beach was clear. Now, the closer we got, the more apparent it was that there was no flashing light. That's when the adrenaline starts to build, you know, your heart starts pounding against your chest. Till eventually we hit the beach. Well, we thought we hit the beach anyway. Instead, we came off this landing craft straight up to our waist in water, which, being the South Atlantic at the onset of winter, was quite cold. Not amused. It was a bit of a farce, really. We used to entering by parachute. Instead, you had 500-600 screaming paras coming off this landing craft onto a deserted beach. See, apparently there was someone there flashing their light, SBS, but we couldn't see them because they were hidden round a corner. We told them who we were, and they told us that they weren't expecting us for another 24 hours. It was typical, really, just like an exercise. Well, we were wet. We always get wet when we're on exercise. So we regrouped, picked up our Bergens, some of which weighed 170 pounds, carrying all of our kit, first aid kit, mortar grenades, smoke grenades, ammunition. Began to work our way up Sussex Mountain. Now, the commanding officer of any battalion has his own TAC HQ, tactical headquarters, in the battle to help him with the combat. It consists of key personnel like battery commanders, the guys in charge of the guns, mortar commanders, signallers, and his very own protection party. Now, in this case, it was Lieutenant Colonel Herbert Jones, and he'd asked me to be in charge of his protection party. So, wherever the CO went, me and my little band of Indians would follow. So, like I said, we were working our way up this mountain, which is a long, hard climb. Now, this is something that we'd been prepared for, but it was quite slippery underfoot. In fact, at one point, I slipped so badly that I ended up on my back because of the weight of the packs, you know, with my legs in the air like a dead turtle. Had to get two guys to pick me up on my feet so I could carry on up the hill. About halfway up, I saw this blip of an aircraft heading towards us. And believe me, that's a sight you don't want to see. But all of a sudden, this missile leapt out of the ground and knocked it out of the sky. I just thought to myself, wow, that's quite realistic, really. You see, it was just like the special effects you'd see in a movie. And that was my first experience of the war. So we got to the top of the mountain and dug in, and we just waited, sitting in our slit trenches for days, you know, just watching the Argentine Air Force bomb the hell out of our Navy in the cove below. Eventually, we were given our orders to TAB, Tactical Advance to Battle, to Goose Green and Darwin Hill, small hamlets where the enemy was waiting for us. Well, even with the prospect of facing some opposition, it still didn't feel like war. Although there was some firing going on in the early stages, there was very little opposition. It lulled the boys into a false sense of security because some of them upped and ran. At 0300 hours, when a frigate from offshore was supposed to provide a naval bombardment and didn't, we had to rely on our own artillery to get the ball rolling. It was so dark that our mortars were the only thing providing any illumination. But we worked our way across the tussock grass. It just reminded us of Dartmoor. The terrain was just the same. It was undulating, slippery, wet. It was dark, cold, and misty. But then the feeling that this was war and not an exercise was suddenly hit home when we started suffering some hits from Argentine sniper fire. All of a sudden, it was your own men you saw lying dead and injured on the ground. But in the first phase of the battle, Colonel Jones took his TAC HQ up to A Company position, ordered 2 of their platoons up to higher ground. Now, as soon as they got there, all hell broke loose. You see, the Argentine trenches were on this high ground, looking down into a little bowl where we were. Thousands of rounds came down on us in those first few seconds. It was utter chaos. Thankfully, the first burst of fire from every trench went high. Now, it has been proven time and time again that a first and last light soldiers do tend to shoot high. And bear in mind, it was getting lighter and lighter all the time at this point. But I'm bloody glad they did. If they'd waited till daylight, they would have slaughtered us. But we still had to get off this killing ground. Now, over to our left, there was this little inlet of water with a fairly high bank. We didn't know if it was mined or not, but looking around, it was literally the only place we could go. So, with a mixture of crawling, running, sprinting, diving, we eventually made it to this inlet. Then we still had to get to A Company position. So in front of us, there was this bank of gorse, which obviously offered good protection from view, but none from fire. So we had to get from our bank, which offered perfect protection, to this bank of gorse, and then on to the injured A Company. And we got through the gorse all right, but that left about 150 yards of open ground left to cover. So me and another sergeant major threw some smoke grenades to cover our tracks. Well, it's good to know they couldn't see you. So we got to injured A Company, and Colonel Jones goes straight up to their officer commanding and says, "What's the situation? Why have you got bogged down? What are you going to do about it?" And when the decision was made, we all got in a straight line, called for more mortar fire and smoke, and then decided to go over the top and head for the Argentine position once again. It was terrifying. Commanders were shouting their orders. "You will take that trench! Before you get in there, you throw in a hand grenade or something to disorganize them, then you get in! Bayonets fixed, automatic fire!" Now, you don't have time to think about it when you're in the middle of it all. You just do as you're told or what you're supposed to do. "If his hands aren't in the air, you have got to presume he's about to kill you. Weapon or no weapon, if his hands aren't up, you shoot him." Like I said, you do as you're told. Anyway, we got about halfway across when the wind blew away all our smoke. We were completely exposed. It was like being sat on a billiard table. It was that flat. So Jones says, "Right, follow me." And off he sprints, exposing us to the enemy. Now, we were running diagonally across his front and down to the right. Now, when I got behind him, we were in a slightly better position, but then he kept on running. I just thought, oh, God, here we go. So I kept up with him. But then I heard a shout to my rear, "Look out, trench to the left!" On hearing that, I hit the ground as fast as I could. You wouldn't stay standing. But Jones had gone beyond the next trench and was now hidden from view because of the way the land was going. So all their fire was coming my way. So I fired back, 20 rounds rapid towards the enemy position, keep his head down while I got in the best position I could. Like I say, there wasn't much cover. Somehow I managed to find some, though. But then I had to try and reload, which wasn't easy because I was lying on my back and the magazines kept getting jammed in their pouches. That's when I saw the other trenches behind us. And Jones charging up the hill with a submachine gun in hand, heading for the first trenches that we'd seen. So I tried to warn him about the others, but he didn't hear me. Well, either that or he just ignored me and carried on up the hill anyway. He got to about 6-7 feet of the trench he was going for before he was hit by the ones behind. You could see the rounds striking the ground, gradually coming up towards him before they hit him in the back. Sent him flying over the top of the trench like he'd been hit by a car. One of the Argentines tried to stick his head out over the trench and finish him off, and made sure he couldn't. But then I had a choice. Either keep firing or use a grenade. Now, I knew if I used a grenade, I'd neutralise the CO at the same time. So I kept firing. for what seemed like an age. Eventually, I heard a bang to my rear. It was A Company with M79 rocket launchers, 66mm grenade launchers. Completely neutralised the bunker. Next thing you know, the white flag comes out and the hands go up. By the time I got to the CO, he was still breathing, although he'd gone into shock, so I gave him the whole litre of my saline solution before I moved on to his. Looking around, I could see that these Argentines were dug in deep. I mean, the amount of ammunition they had, they could have stayed there for months. But they were just boys. Anyway, some of the lads started to construct a stretcher out of the corrugated sheeting that was lying around. First attempt collapsed with the CO on it. It was one of those sorry states of war. It didn't do him any more harm than the injuries he had, but he hit the ground hard. So he reconstructed it, carried him off to safer ground, waiting for a helicopter to arrive. I tried to keep him warm with his own windproofs and quilted jacket, but then he died. It's an odd feeling. The COs are not supposed to die. I mean, they're usually the ones stood at the back shouting orders from there, not leading from the front, definitely not in front of their own protection party. I didn't have much time to ponder on it, though, as Major Keeble took command of the battalion, ordered that A Company stay with the CO while the rest of 2 Para carried on the main attack. It was at 1300 hours the next day that Major Keeble was able to supervise the surrender of the Argentine prisoners. Now, the officers asked if they could address their men before surrendering, so we let them. But then we released the captives from the town hall. This was our chance to recuperate a bit, enjoy a cup of tea with the locals. Our officers were gathering whatever intel they could from the prisoners, but it must have looked odd to the locals. Weird, even. I mean, these guys who were trying to kill each other only moments before were now sharing a joke and a cigarette. I guess as far as the Argentines were concerned, their war was over, though. Not for 2 Para, however. No. We still had a long yomp across the island to join in the main siege on Stanley. No, we didn't see much action there. But even after we'd heard that the Argentines had surrendered, we still couldn't lose focus. I mean, the whole area was littered with mines, so we had to pick our way through it carefully. No one wanted to die after the war had ended. But at least we could take our helmets off, put our berets back on. We didn't have to worry about the Argentine Air Force dropping bombs on us anymore, you see. Now, when we were told we could go home, we were told we wouldn't be sharing the boat with the Marines. No. Instead, we'd have to get the aircraft back. Oh, we didn't care as long as we went home. But when we landed at RAF Braze Norton, however, some of the lads were a little bit miffed that we weren't going to be getting the hero's welcome that some of the other soldiers had got. But when you walk through those terminal doors and see all your loved ones waiting there with tears streaming down their cheeks, you soon realise what's important to you. And the first person I saw was my wife. My daughter and son, mum and dad, brothers, mates from Guildford. I mean, they can teach you anything about being toe-to-toe with the enemy, but they can't teach you to deal with an emotional family. I mean, crying isn't the sort of thing a para does, so I didn't. But there was water coming out of my eyes. They say that's allowed, but paras definitely don't cry. I'll tell you what, though. It's at times like those that you suddenly realise you're actually just as vulnerable as everyone else.